I'm delighted to be here today. I've prepared a set of slides that have to do with the theme of reimagining mourning. I've asked Tamara and Store Gallery to kindly invite me in the future to have a less lugubrious theme, because I do make artworks that are a little bit funner, to be honest. But right now, we're going to concentrate on artworks that have to do with mourning. I'm a Mexican artist, but I've been living in Canada for the past 20 years. I work in a team here in Montreal. I'm connected through my studio. So I love to start with my team, because everything that I do is in collaboration with a group of people who half of them are scientists or programmers. The other half are artists, architects, designers. I myself have a chemistry degree, but then I graduated and started working in performing arts. I think a lot of the work that I do closer to performing arts and visual arts, because most of the works are interactive. I'm going to start with the artwork that is currently on view at Sur Gallery. It's a work called Nivel de Confianza, Level of Confidence. And it's a work that was made a few months after 43 students were kidnapped in Mexico, in Iguala, in Guerrero, and Ayotzinapa, and disappeared. And then the government went ahead and gave some account of what happened to them. Supposedly they were kidnapped and murdered by Guerreros Unidos drug cartel, but there was no forensic evidence that matched this official story. So the families of these students doubted the official story and kept looking for the kidnapped students that were between 17 and 21-year-olds. And the hope was that they could be found alive in a way. So when I heard that the community in the field was doing a constant search to try and find the students, we made an artwork here, which is basically a number of Eigen, LBPN, and Fisher face recognition systems that allow the system to look at you and compare you to the database of the 43 students. So the system measures your eyes and the distance to your chin and your nose and so on. And it looks to see who you look like the most. Like it might say something like, you look like Martin Getsemani Garcia. But then the system has a level of confidence. The algorithm says, we are 17% sure that you are Martin Getsemani Garcia. The result, student not found. So the idea with this work was to create a kind of empathic memorial, if you will, to remember these students, first of all, not as if they were dead, because that's the official story. The search must be kept alive, to think about their situation also in relationship to you. It's not others. It's actually a fraternal connection that we have to them. You may be next. And then most importantly, that the work was not really an artwork, more was a campaign, where you can download the artwork for free from my website, and any university or gallery or foundation or school could actually set up this work virally. And so this piece has been shown in over 100 places in most regions of Mexico. And the idea is, again, to keep the search alive. The second thing we did with this project is that if it generates income, like for example, with an exhibition such as at Sur Gallery or elsewhere, we ask the presenter to do a donation. The donations are usually going directly to the families of the disappeared students to help with forensic teams, with their lawyers, their caravanas. And lately, we've been giving it to just to Amnesty International, earmarked for Mexico. So generate some income to try and help the situation. And then the third sort of aspect of this project is that it's entirely open source. So you can go to the GitHub of my studio and download the source code and make your own version of this project. So when we first presented this project here in Montreal, I was interviewed by the CBC, and they told me, well, the situation is very dire in Mexico. And I said, yes, it's very dire, but now we're working with some indigenous programmers here in Montreal who are repurposing this project, not to look for the 43 disappeared students of Ayotzinapa, but to look for the over 1,000 women who have been lost in the past 5 years. Nobody knows where they are. And so the idea is to create a general purpose search function where surveillance technology is not looking for the culprits. We know who they are, they're in power, but to look for this kind of search for the disappeared. So this project exists, as I was saying, more as a campaign, and it's available on my website, both as a piece of software and as a piece of source code. The artists that I most admire tend to be artists that do their best work with mournful issues, right? So people like Jochen Gertz and Esther Shaliv Gertz, people like Krzysztof Odishko, Rachel White-Reed, Hans Hakes. And I got offered the possibility of creating a memorial for the massacre of students of Tlatelolco in 1968. And so as part of my research, I was always have been very interested in the sort of technological history of art in Mexico, where I'm from. I found this particular group, the Stridentista poets, quite inspiring. They were kind of like the Mexican Dadaists, if you will. And among many other things that they would do is they were the pioneers of radio broadcasting in Mexico. So they had a manifesto for Antenna Man. The idea was that the poets were the first to bring radio broadcasting into the country because they believed that through this new electromagnetic waves, they could actually reach, all of Mexico and sort of disintermediate the art event. And one of the poems in particular is this work by Javier Icaza, which talks about this magnifying sort of loudspeakers, massive, that could be placed on top of Popocatépetl volcano and have the voices of intellectuals be amplified for all to hear. So taking as an inspiration this, I created a work called Voz Alta. And for those who don't know what happened, is about 10 days before the Olympics were to start in Mexico City, the military and the police came in and murdered peaceful protests of students. Depending on who you ask, about 300 people died that day, and the blood was cleared from the plancha de Tlatelolco, and the media were complicit. Nobody reported that this had happened. And the subject was taboo in Mexico for about 30 years, but now the site of the massacre is part of UNAM University, and they commission a variety of artists to make artworks. So my piece was a megaphone that converted your voice into massive flashes of light.
Bueno, mi comentario es acerca de la represión que vivimos en este momento. Los mártires, todas aquellas personas que lucharon, que vieron por el futuro, pues muchas veces los dejamos en el olvido o solo recordamos.
So as the people would speak in the site of the massacre, their voice would become light in this massive searchlight and hit the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, other three lights would go around the city, and you could see them from very far. It's like a 15-kilometer radius. And the flashing is in sync to the voices of the people. Of course, you could speak unmoderated and uncensored. And over the period of a couple of weeks that the project was live, every night, we would have survivors of the massacre, students, poets, neighbors, who would come to the microphone and speak their mind. And it was quite a touching project, not because of what I did, but because of the thirst that people have to be heard. And when you're thinking about this memorial, it's important to not just kind of have the lugubrious monolith of names of whom we've lost, but also to do a performative reenactment of a takeover of public space, which is what this project was seeking to do. Among the people who spoke was, like a fireman who said, "My name's so-and-so, and I'm here to say that routinely the government asks us to put coloring in our water tanks. So when we spray protesters, they're easily identified. And now I became a fireman to protect people, not to be part of the apparatus of repression. We had a guy who said, my name's so-and-so, and I'm here because I'm the son of one of the soldiers who committed the massacre. And I've lived with this guilt all my life. And I'm here because I'm a new generation. I mean, it was an incredible, sequence of people taking the microphone and having their voices heard. The project was completely, as I was saying, unmoderated and uncensored. And this was a very important thing. In Mexico, UNAM University, the university is autonomous. It's actually in the Constitution of Mexico that the police or the military cannot enter a university campus. And so there's a lot of freedom. As Jesus Rodriguez used to say, in Mexico, there is no censorship until you get killed. So in this particular case, we are in an autonomous zone. People can speak their mind, and gentlemen like this guy, express themselves about both the experience that they had, but also in the context of contemporary massacres and contemporary situations. So the idea of this amplified open mic situation was quite successful to channel this kind of historical memory. And then, as I was saying, the light beam would hit the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and from there it would be beamed by 3 other searchlights in 3 directions of Mexico City. And what we also did is we converted the voices of people live to FM radio. So if you were driving in your car, or you were at home or at work or at school, and you would see these flashes of light in the night sky, you could tune into 96.1 FM Radio UNAM to listen live to what the voices were saying, what the lights were transmitting, and in a way taking over the public space that is the electromagnetic spectrum as well.
40 años desde la matanza de pueblos y estudiantes indefensos perpetrada en Tlatelolco, octubre 2, 1968, y los culpables no han sido castigados. Todo el sistema judicial mexicano es visto por la ciudadanía, según todas las encuestas, como algo ajeno y contrario a ella. Ahí están las matanzas del 10 de junio de 1971, de Acteal, de Aguas Blancas, entre muchas otras, donde no se ha hecho justicia.
And of course, this is a project that is a radio program. So whenever no one was participating live, you couldn't have silence. And we would trigger memories from intellectuals, from student movement, from, sort of witnesses of what happened, and automatically they would play back the archive. So the idea is to have that archive to remember what happened, but also give priority to the people who are speaking now on behalf of contemporary, power asymmetries. The project also, allowed a lot of different kinds of expressions. So it wasn't all lugubrious. We had marriage proposals, we had beatboxers and kids and poets. And that's part of the beauty of working with this kind of anti-monument, the idea that the artwork is not representing a particular vision. Bertolt Brecht said that great Rome was filled with arches of triumph. And he asks, who built them? Over whom did the Caesars triumph? And this is a very important question that we have now as we reassess, for example, the Columbus statue that we just have in Reforma in Mexico City that has just been removed, or all the Southern generals that are being removed from the Southern United States, or here in Canada, a whole bunch of different monuments and streets that were named for colonial or particularly brutal, racist, hegemonic colonial powers is being removed. And so the question is, how can we as a diverse society revert these technologies which normally are used for Olympics or for celebrations, and create more critical platforms for people to self-represent? So this is the key thing of my work, is that the artworks are out of my control and they become platforms for people to go ahead and to express themselves, oftentimes in surprising ways. So a project like this is what I call an anti-monument, which means that it's political, but not political in a moralistic way or in capital P politics or capital H history. It's about the micropolitics of people being able to speak their mind, and for this to then have like an amplified sort of impact, both in urban space, because you can see the light from 15 kilometers, but also through this radio sort of broadcast, because that's what connected also that public space, which is the electromagnetic spectrum. So this project, Voz Alta, took place in 2008, and I will show a project that is similar that we just did across the U.S.-Mexico border. I'm very interested in asphyxiation, especially nowadays after COVID. We can't take the atmosphere for granted. I think of the air a lot, and all of my most recent works have to do with the idea of making tangible breathing. And one of the first pieces that I did for this was Omara Portuondo. This is the singer for Buena Vista Social Club. And we asked her to breathe into a brown paper bag, which is actually a fried chicken brown paper bag. And it keeps her breath inside of this bag. And then we did the same with Paulina Oliveros. Paulina Oliveros is the American avant-garde composer and accordionist who was first the person to coin deep listening and the idea that the atmosphere is not neutral. And then we have Efraín Jara from Ecuador, the great poet who also passed away, just like Paulina Oliveros. And then finally, I just made another version of this work with Nicole Brossard here in Quebec. Basically, the idea is capture these people's breath and connect it up to this oak respirator machine, which inflates and deflates the brown paper bag 10,000 times a day, which is the normal respiratory frequency for an adult at rest. So you see this little bag, the breath of Efraín Jara is going from the bellows and into the bag. And each one of these pieces is shown typically in a collection. So Paulina Oliveros is at SF MoMA. If you want to see the last breath of Paulina Oliveros, you go to SF MoMA, which is where it's located now. And the project is a ridiculous kind of biometric capture, right? Like, how can you capture the essence of somebody like a singer or a poet? But that's what art does, right? It tries to interfere, it tries to intervene. Montaigne said that to philosophize is to learn how to die. And I think that art is similar. You know, we try and create these artworks to create some kind of legacy or continuity, but it's all futile, right? Like, the machine can never represent the grandeur of somebody like Paulina Oliveros. So it's very important that whoever is in the portrait, in the biometric portrait, have a sense of humor. The piece size, so from time to time it goes takes a deep breath, and it also has metrics, so you can actually see how many movements the bellows have had in the past little while. So this project, Last Breath, gave rise to a much bigger project, which I've exhibited in many locations. It's called Vicious Circular Breathing. And in this work, we have 61 brown paper bags connected to a hermetically sealed glass chamber, which invites the public to walk into this chamber and breathe the air that has already been breathed by everybody before them. So you walk in, you press this button, you go through a decompression chamber where all the clean air that just walked in escapes. And then you're invited into a main chamber where you can sit and breathe the viruses, bacteria, pheromones, and other airborne pollutants that could be stored in the room. And originally, I thought nobody would go into it. I thought it was really disgusting. But in fact, people don't heed the warnings and they go in and sit there. The warnings are for panic because it takes, you have to go through the decompression chamber, asphyxiation because there's only 10 days of oxygen, and contagion because there's no filters. Now, the communal air, this recycled air, goes through a system of bellows and valves to then actuate the 61 brown paper bags. It's 61 because that's the octaves that inspire the design of the organs that we use to make this piece. This project is, in my opinion, a project about the commons. Then CEO of Nestle had just said that water was not a fundamental human rights because they own Perrier and Evian and all the water bottlers. And so the question of who owns the air, who owns the water, the land that we stand on is an important question, especially when we're living at 421 parts per million of carbon dioxide. No human in history has ever breathed this high amount of carbon dioxide, which of course is creating climate change and an extinction event. So projects like this try to sort of highlight the limited amount of air that we have. And crucially for me, when you hear of a new media artist such as myself, we're always talking about how an artwork empowers you or personalizes your participation, or you're going to be, you're going to have agency. In this project, if you participate too much, you die. And also important in this project, your participation makes the air more toxic for future participants, pretty much as this kind of connection to our own existence, sort of destroying our ecosystem. So Vicious Circle of Breathing was going to be presented at SF MoMA, my retrospective. It was going to open in April of 2020, and of course it got canceled because of COVID. But now we have a location in San Francisco. It's going to be at Gray Area to be presented in San Francisco, but I doubt anybody will go inside. So interested by this kind of ephemeral sort of representation of our breath in pre-Columbian codices, we see the kind of turbulence that is emanating from our mouth. And I wanted to see what's the real shape of this. So we worked with NYU, Georgia Tech, and Auburn University to create a system of laser tomography, which is a system of layers of density that could capture, as you speak, the heat of the air that comes out of your mouth and create, if you want, like bread slices of the shape of your voice as you speak. In Spanish, we call it el hálito. Hálito is the air ejection that comes out as you speak. So I wanted to see what form it had. And the laser tomography then was captured, and these are the density slides, if you will. We put them together to create this video. And then we used a thing called photogrammetry to create a three-dimensional model of what the shape was like. And then we 3D printed it in steel. So this is the world's first 3D printed speech bubble. And sometimes I lie and I say that the word is fuck, because I really like the idea that it's the size of your hand and you can throw it like a projectile. But in fact, the truth is that the word is as au, from au clair de la lune, because the very first phrase that we printed is au clair de la lune, because a fellow called de Martinville, about 20 years before Edison's phonograph, recorded what is known as the very first recording of the human voice. He used a system of wax and soot to record a voice, and now we've played it back. And what he said is au clair de la lune. So we decided that that would be the first thing that we would 3D print as a speech bubble. And what's curious is, of course, even the same person saying the same thing will give you a completely different shape because of the fluid dynamics and the kind of irreversible, chaotic way in which fluids flow. So this is the sculpture. And now we're preparing a bigger version of this work, except in this case, it's going to be a homage to R. Murray Schafer, who just died. This is a statement from R. Murray Schafer, which is listen to the world. And we're going to capture that. We're going to slice it. We're going to create the object and then print it in this, sort of polished aluminum. And it will sit in Ottawa at the National Gallery. So this is another way to capture the movement. So in Mexico, people like myself, so I'm an atheist, and what I find is that we atheists really need saints, and it's difficult to find saints for atheists. But this is as close as it gets. Ignacio Ramirez, el Nigromante, was a poet and politician in Mexico in the 19th century, who was apparently a very honorable and truthful person who worked in politics for quite a while. Among the things that he did, he, how do you say, he expropriated the churches and converted them into public schools. He wrote the very first school books in Mexico, the public school books. He advocated for women to be able to vote. And most importantly, or equally importantly, in the 1920s, he said something along the lines of Dios no existe, God does not exist. The natural beings emerge from their own conditions. And he said this, a number of years before Darwin or Nietzsche. And forever, he got known as El Nigromante, the necromancer, because, of course, the very Catholic, very conservative society in the 19th century in Mexico could not believe that someone was doubting that God existed. They call him the necromancer, and he took it on. He said, yeah, I'm the necromancer. Anyway, very interested in this character and historical character. And his family got in touch with Jesus Rodriguez, a friend of mine who is a dramaturg and performer, and said, well, we have the mortuary mask of the original Nigromantes. Like, can you make it into an artwork? And so Jesusa contacted me, and what I proposed is to do a work with Jesusa and Damian Alcázar, a Mexican actor. And this is what you see. So when you go and visit the house where Ignacio Ramirez was born in San Miguel de Allende, Guanajuato, you arrive, and there's a little room where you can visit the mortuary mask of El Nigromante. So it looks like this. When you arrive, you just see the mask in this kind of wooden structure, illuminated, and it's illuminated in white. But when you arrive and you look at it, it wakes up.
Los muertos no hablan.
And it tells you, los muertos no hablan, dead people don't talk. And then he makes
También se puede matar a los muertos.
he makes a statement. We have about 200 different statements. And then he asks you a question.
¿Le temes a la muerte? ¿O a tu muerte?
He's asking me if I'm afraid of death, or my death in particular. So he disappears, and then live, the camera extracts my face and puts it onto the mask. So that's me answering that I'm both afraid of death and my death. Once you answer the oracle or the mask, you disappear, and it just becomes white and doesn't turn on again. Every person that goes in to see the piece gets a different statement and a different question, because there's a database of them. So usually he tells you things like, revolution cannot happen without women. And then he asks you, are you corrupt? Or something like this. And then you can answer it, and you are mapped right into the mortuary mask. So again, playful and absurd, but quite haunting and spectral. So effective. So one big part of the problem, I think, in a society of metrics, is that we don't really have the capacity to understand some of the statistics that are sent around at any given time. So if I tell you that 80,000 children die each day of curable diseases, we just hear that and we go, well, that's a lot, and we move on with our life as we should, right? It's very difficult to get a sense for how often this happens. So this piece here, Sway, is actually a metronome that the curator or the collector can actually tune to a different statistic in the world. So typically the one that you see here is tuned to the rate of homicides. So every 40 to 50 seconds, this rope that you're seeing stand straight, this noose, moves very little. How little? Let's just try and play it. So when you see this tiny little sway, is because someone just got murdered. Now, this piece, we have it with some statistics that are quite brutal. For example, rate of extinction. So every 3 minutes on average, a new species, a different species, disappears from the planet completely and irretrievably. So when you have this metronome tuned to the rate of the extinction of species, every 3 minutes, the piece will be quiet, but then it'll move a little bit like that. And then you know that a species has disappeared. So the question is, how can we as artists visualize, make tangible, make anthropomorphize some of this data? If you were to tune this news to violence against women, rape, and so on, it's every like 5-10 seconds. It's just going all the time. You could do it, for example, with the rate of immigrants crossing the border who die. You could do it with anything, in fact. It's just a way to tune this metronome to data that happens, that is happening at any time. We have one piece that's called Metronomes, which has 10 different nooses in the Museo de Tolerancia in Mexico, which is our Holocaust museum, which has 10 different statistics being updated, and you can get the sense of the rhythm of these crimes against humanity. A little bit more optimistic. This is the work done in November of 2019. It's called Border Tuner, in Spanish, Sintonizador Fronterizo. And it's basically a work that creates bridges of light across the US-Mexico border between Ciudad Juarez and El Paso, Texas. And so you have this device that allows you to move these searchlights and scan the horizon with your lights. And when my lights and your lights intersect in midair, the computer automatically opens a bidirectional channel of communication so that I can hear you, you can hear me. And if I don't like what you're saying, I can just use the wheel to tune you off and look for somebody else. There's 3 stations in Mexico and 3 in the United States. Over the course of several weeks, tens of thousands of people came to the area and spoke to each other. You didn't really know who was at the other end. You would just hear their voices. And the meetings were unbelievable. I mean, over the course of this time, we had friendships, we had people who were separated, or people like these 2 ladies who did not know each other.
Igual allá. ¿Aló?
¿Tiene familiares aquí?
Sí, allá tengo bastantes familiares.
¿Y si viene seguido para acá?
Por el temor o alma lo que pasó.
Yo tengo a mi madre y a mi hermano allá. Tengo años sin verlos.
Ay. ¿Por motivo de pasar acá no puede venir o por temor a lo que ha estado sucediendo?
Ellos también por eso no vienen, por temor.
Así es.
Y nos comunicamos por teléfono, es la única manera. Pero sé que están bien.
Gracias a Dios.
So most of the time, the people talking to each other would sort of connect on the fact that 70% of the people in one city have family members across and now have been separated. This was, of course, at the time of the extremely adversarial and nationalistic and racist kind of administration of the United States, also a nationalist government in Mexico. And the people, when we were working in the border, did not really want to talk about the wall. They wanted to talk about the interconnections that they already have. So they share a history, they share an environment, they share an economy, they share fraternal connections. There's so many connections already existing. So this project wasn't making bridges between the 2 sister cities. It was just highlighting that these connections are already existing. And so we saw a lot of people very emotional. But we also saw some fun stuff, a lot of flirting, you know, a lot of flirting across the US-Mexico border. It's like, hey, have you been to Juarez? And it's like, no, I'm afraid. And then she would say, no, but I'll take you around. What's your Facebook? And so it was very fun to see that. The project was made in two parts. It was done with Carrie Doyle and Leon de la Rosa and Edgar Picasso. And what we would do is we would have every night a theme, like say for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, we would have a night for historians or for feminist rappers or a night for LGBTQ community, or we had a night for indigenous communities, because we wanted to make sure that a lot of diverse groups would be brought to it. And then after they would, you know, sort of participate, we would open up the microphones for the general public. So the project was very moving. People like this veteran who fought for the United States in the Vietnam War was deported. So he's saying that this is the mayor of El Paso, who's a Republican, but he's actually speaking, you know, very eloquently against racist policies of his own party, talking about how El Paso and Juarez have been sister cities since before the United States existed. So I appreciated that. Anyhow, the point is, how do you create a piece that can take on this atmospheric condition, right? Like, we've divided by this wall. Is there a way that we can learn from Sun Ra or from Otopin or from Julia Cosice or from any of the people who have been telling us we need to take over the air, to create a different platform for exchange? And so this project was successful in that the people were so eager for this wall to not be a dividing line, but rather a place that brings people together, right? And that's Rael, the great architect in the United States, talks a lot about not a border for dividing, but a border for bringing people together. Border Tuner had many other aspects, but we don't have to go into it. But just to say that it was actually quite festive, and we had, again, a project that was completely out of control. This is the wheel that I was telling you. So as you spin that dial, the lights would move, and then finally you could hear somebody on the other side.
Chiriscos, ¿cómo estás?
Anyway, so this is a family speaking across the border. So, and we had serenades and we had mariachis. I mean, it was quite a fun project. All right. Just finally, I have some pictures here of a project that I just did in Toronto called Pulse Topology, which took place in the Bentway. And this is a piece that is basically activated with the heartbeat of people. So each one of these 3,000 light bulbs is actually flickering to the heartbeat of a different person who touches it. And then to finish my presentation, I want to show you the memorial that we did for COVID back a year ago. This is a piece that was commissioned by MOAC Museum in Mexico City. Cuauhtemoc Medina is the curator. And there were two things that were sort of in our mind as we developed this project. The first was the fact that, again, you know, hundreds of thousands of people back then, millions of people now, had died. And this was worse than it could have ever been imagined. So this was worst case scenario. And the numbers were impersonal and were cold. So how can we put a face behind the numbers that were given to us? How could we create a platform that would allow people to honor their dead and make a dedication that was public? The second thing is that a lot of people who, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, who would have their dad or their uncle or aunt sick, all of a sudden would go into the hospital, and then 2 weeks later they were dead, and they could never say farewell. They could never be with them. The ways, the methods, the rituals that we have to mourn, the wakes, the speeches, the closure that we all need to say goodbye were impossible because of social distancing. So could we create an artwork that used the internet to somehow broadcast an event that friends and family could sort of honor? So the project is called A Crack in the Hourglass. In Spanish, I called it La Arena Fuera del Reloj. And it's basically a machine that we developed that can draw, using sand from an hourglass, portraits of people sent by friends and family over the website acrackinthehourglass.net. So this is the original machine. It's all kind of made with materials that we had at the studio. And basically, you send your photo, it gets analyzed, and then it goes very slowly drawn by this sand. And then once a particular image is made, we are broadcasting this live, so you can see the making of the portrait. But we also create a website for each and every participant with their dedication, with a photo, and with a video of what happened. So this is the machine working, making an image. This is the original image, and then the image of the portrait. But once a portrait is done, a particularly grueling part would come in, which is the machine would tilt and recover all of the sand so that it could be reused. So this was important because all of the portraits that have been made, which is over 500 so far, are all made with the exact same amount of sand. This is a typical web page made for each participant. And this is just one video showing the making of a lot of these portraits. So clearly, this is not enough. Clearly, this is just one gesture. But the idea is, on the one hand, when you send the picture of your loved one, the system gives you an estimate. It says, well, in 40 minutes, your portrait will go live. And then it takes about 30 minutes to make a drawing. And so you could log in with friends and family to see the appearance and disappearance of your loved one. And what we're hoping is that this can provide some closure. So the project currently is being exhibited at the Brooklyn Museum in New York City for the next 9 months. And if you go to the Brooklyn Museum, you can send your portrait also there in a priority queue so that it can be realized there in front of your family members. But basically, you can do this online as well. And that's what most people do. So A Crack in the Hourglass, if you are unlucky and you have a family member or friend who died because of COVID, you can submit your images through this. I had 2 friends who died because of COVID. I myself had COVID in March of last year. And so I'm, just like most of my work, after it's done, I'm just one more spectator or one more participant or visitor to the artwork, and then I see where it goes. I'm ending with this quote from Achille Mbembe about, the fundamental importance of being able to give your last farewell, to be able to say goodbye, and to be able to have access to those rituals that make us human, which is basically to understand that our life is finite and that memento mori is something that we need to just remember, that just like the continuity of that sand that has drawn all of those portraits, we made it, we're here. We need to be thankful for it. We need to remember our losses. I think that art can be very good for mourning, but also for continuity. And so here are some URLs for the project and for other projects that I didn't get to talk about. And the GitHub, which is, if you're a coder, pretty much everything that we do in my studio, we open up our source code for other artists to be able to use it. Exactly the opposite than NFTs. That's what we go for at the studio. We're media artists, and we still believe in trying to help each other and making this information as available and free as possible.